The morning was quiet, the kind of quiet that only suburbs can manufacture. Perfectly trimmed lawns, identical mailboxes, and houses painted in colors chosen from the same approved palette. On Willow Creek Drive in Plano, Texas, everything looked orderly, peaceful, almost too peaceful. At 7:14 a.m., David Carter stepped outside with a mug of coffee in one hand and a garden hose in the other. He wore gray sweatpants and a plain t-shirt, blending into the stillness of the neighborhood. David moved with deliberate calm, watering the flower bed by his fence. Birds chirped. A delivery truck rumbled faintly in the distance. From the outside, he looked like any ordinary man starting his day. But to the HOA, David wasn't ordinary. For months, the Homeowners Association had been after him. First, it was letters about his trash cans being visible for too long. Then it was warnings about his fence being one shade darker than regulation beige. When he ignored the letters, they escalated to fines. When he ignored the fines, they whispered about taking stronger action. And when whispers turned to anger, they came up with an idea so outrageous it felt ripped from a cheap crime drama. The SUV arrived silently, rolling down the street with tinted windows. It was black, unmarked, and immediately out of place among the minivans and family sedans. Curtains twitched open across the block. Neighbors peered out, some with curiosity, others with anticipation. Two men stepped out. Both wore dark tactical vests stamped with HOA Police in bold white letters. Their boots hit the pavement with heavy authority, their mirrored sunglasses hiding their eyes. They looked official enough to scare an average homeowner. That was the point. One neighbor muttered behind her blinds, finally. Someone's doing something about him. David turned his head slowly as the two men marched up his driveway. His gaze lingered on the patches sewn onto their vests, the cheap nylon belts, the knockoff radios clipped to their sides. His lips pressed into a thin line, not of fear but of recognition. The taller of the two barked. David Carter. You are in violation of multiple HOA regulations. You're coming with us. The street fell silent. The only sound was water trickling from David's still running garden hose onto the soil. David said nothing at first. He placed his coffee mug carefully on the porch rail, twisted the nozzle on the hose, and shut off the water. He wound the hose back onto its holder with meticulous precision, as though the two armed strangers weren't even there. When he finally looked up, his eyes were calm, steady, unreadable. Coming with you, where, exactly? His voice was smooth, but it carried weight. The second man stepped forward, pulling a pair of zip ties from his pocket. Don't play smart. You've ignored citations, fines, and official notices. We have the authority to detain violators until a hearing is scheduled. Now, come quietly, or we'll make you. Gasps echoed faintly from the houses across the street. Phones recorded from behind glass. Some neighbors looked horrified, others smirked, thinking the HOA had finally put David in his place. But David didn't move. He tilted his head, a faint, almost amused smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You boys sure you know who you're talking to? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the fake officers' faces. David stepped forward, close enough that the taller man instinctively shifted back. His voice dropped to a low, steady growl. Because if you don't, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. And with that, the stage was set for a confrontation the HOA never saw coming. The taller man stiffened at David's words. His partner clenched the zip ties tighter, trying to cover his hesitation with aggression. To them, this was supposed to be easy, a quick show of power, a staged arrest to scare a stubborn homeowner into submission. But David Carter's calmness unnerved them. We're not going to ask again, the taller one snapped, his voice louder now, meant as much for the neighbors watching as for David himself. You've been ordered by the Homeowners Association to comply. You're under HOA custody. The phrase itself sounded absurd, HOA custody, but the men wore it with confidence, as if repeating it enough would make it real. David crossed his arms over his chest, his muscles flexing beneath the soft fabric of his shirt. He looked like a man carved from stone, unshakable. His gaze flicked once to the SUV parked at the curb, then back to the two imposters. "You know," he said evenly, "real law enforcement doesn't announce themselves with fake patches and off-brand gear from a surplus store." The shorter man bristled. "You think this is a joke?" He reached for David's arm, intending to yank it behind his back. That's when it happened. David moved with terrifying speed. In one smooth motion, he sidestepped, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted it down with expert precision. The zip ties clattered to the ground as the imposter let out a strangled cry, forced to his knees in the span of a second. The taller man staggered back, fumbling for the radio clipped to his vest. "We need backup," he barked, but the static-filled device didn't respond. It wasn't even transmitting. David leaned close to the man on his knees, his voice a low growl only the two of them could hear. "You're impersonating federal officers. Do you have any idea what that means?" The man's face turned pale, sweat beading at his temple. He shook his head, suddenly realizing just how badly they had underestimated their target. Across the street, the audience of neighbors buzzed with disbelief. Phones zoomed in, capturing every second. Some laughed, assuming David was just unusually good at self-defense. Others whispered nervously, realizing this wasn't the reaction of an ordinary homeowner. The taller imposter finally drew the pistol from his hip, plastic, airsoft grade, its orange tip clumsily painted black. He pointed it at David with trembling hands. "Back off," he shouted, though his voice cracked, betraying fear. David didn't even flinch. His eyes locked onto the weapon, and in one fluid motion, he kicked it from the man's hands. The gun skidded across the driveway, useless. Silence fell. David stood tall, both men disarmed, one on the ground clutching his twisted wrist, the other frozen, staring in shock. "Let me make this clear," David said, his tone suddenly cold, professional. He wasn't talking as a neighbor anymore. He was talking as something else. "You're not just trespassing. You're not just pretending. You've crossed into federal territory. And that's a level of stupid that ends careers, or lives." The taller man stammered, "We were just following orders." David's eyes narrowed. "Whose?" The two imposters froze. They didn't answer. Couldn't. The silence said enough. David's smile returned, faint but sharp. He stepped back, giving them just enough space to scramble to their feet. "Good. Don't answer. I'll find out myself." With a calmness that sent chills down every spine watching, David pulled a small black leather wallet from his back pocket. He flipped it open, flashing a badge that gleamed in the morning light. The seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation caught the sun. Gasps erupted from across the street. Someone dropped their phone in shock. David's voice boomed, not just for the imposters, but for every hidden witness in every window. "My name is Special Agent David Carter. Counterintelligence Division. And you two just committed a federal crime on my front lawn." The color drained from both men's faces. For the first time, they looked like what they really were, two cowards in cheap uniforms, way out of their depth. And David knew, this was only the beginning. The imposters froze, staring at the badge in David's hand as though it were a weapon more dangerous than any firearm. The sun glinted off the gold seal, proof that the man they'd come to intimidate wasn't just another problem neighbor. He was the problem they could never solve. Neighbors across the street whispered fiercely behind their curtains. Phones trembled as they recorded every second. They had thought they were watching a petty HOA showdown, but this was something far larger. David snapped his badge shut with a crisp click and slid it back into his pocket. Then he took a step closer to the taller imposter, his voice low and deliberate, the kind of tone that made men confess things they swore they'd never say. "You thought you could play cops," David said, his eyes boring into the man's mirrored sunglasses. "You thought the vest, the fake radio, the cheap gun would make you believable. But here's the problem, real agents can smell fraud before you open your mouth." The taller man swallowed hard. His partner, still clutching his wrist, muttered, "We didn't mean." David cut him off with a glare sharp enough to silence a room. You didn't mean what? To commit felony impersonation of a federal officer? To carry out a kidnapping attempt on behalf of your little HOA board? Or to point a weapon, fake or not, at a federal agent? The man on the ground winced, his mouth opening but no words coming out. David straightened, lifting his chin, projecting authority that filled the entire street. His voice carried, deliberately loud enough for the neighbors recording behind their blinds. This is federal jurisdiction now. Anyone impersonating law enforcement can face up to 3 years in prison. And that's the light version. Add weapons charges, conspiracy, and attempted unlawful detainment. He let the words hang in the air, heavy, suffocating. You're staring down a decade behind bars. The taller man's bravado crumbled. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time, he looked less like a fake officer and more like what he really was, a frightened HOA lackey playing dress-up. You don't get it, he stammered, voice cracking. We were told you were dangerous. That you were one of those troublemakers who didn't respect authority. They said we had to put you in your place before you embarrassed the board. David's eyebrow arched. The board? The shorter man nodded, his face pale as chalk. Yeah. The HOA president, she said you were a threat. She wanted us to scare you. Said if we didn't, she'd ruin us instead. A ripple of realization passed through the street. Neighbors exchanged nervous glances. Everyone knew the HOA president, Mrs. Kensington, was power-hungry, but ordering a fake police squad? That was unthinkable. David's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. Bethany Kensington, he said quietly, as though confirming a file he already had memorized. The taller imposter blinked. You know her? David chuckled, but there was no humor in it. His laugh was low, dangerous, like thunder before a storm. I know everyone, son. And Bethany just made the biggest mistake of her life. The two fake cops looked at each other, dread sinking in. David turned, addressing the entire street now, speaking not just to the men but to every hidden camera lens recording him. His voice was steady, commanding, the way generals speak before battles. You all wanted to see what happens when an HOA oversteps, he said. Well, here it is. Fake cops on my driveway, trying to drag me away on false authority. This isn't about grass length or fence paint anymore. This is fraud, impersonation, conspiracy, and I will personally make sure every last one of them answers for it. Gasps echoed behind the glass. Some neighbors quickly pulled their curtains shut, afraid to be seen watching. Others leaned in closer, captivated. David pointed toward the SUV. Keys. Now. The taller man hesitated, then fumbled in his pocket, tossing a set of keys into David's hand. David opened the SUV's driver's side door, glanced inside, and smirked at what he saw: fake arrest paperwork, poorly forged badges, and a crumpled envelope with the HOA president's name scribbled on it. He held the envelope up like a trophy. And here's my proof. The imposters looked as though their souls had left their bodies. David's eyes darkened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only they could hear. You boys better pray I decide to hand you to the police, instead of handling this myself. The street was no longer quiet. It buzzed with fear, curiosity, and the undeniable sense that the suburban facade of control had just shattered. And David knew, this was no longer just about him versus the HOA. This was war. For years, Willow Creek had been the poster child of suburbia. Perfect hedges. Polished driveways. HOA rules so strict, even the color of holiday lights was regulated. But in a single morning, that glossy facade cracked. The neighbors who had been peeking from behind curtains now stood frozen, phones trembling in their hands. They thought they were watching a minor drama, a stubborn homeowner finally put in his place by the HOA. Instead, they had just watched two men in fake uniforms collapse under the weight of a badge far more powerful than theirs. And David Carter, quiet, unassuming David, had revealed himself as something else entirely. Mrs. Alvarez from next door whispered to her husband, "He's FBI, the FBI." All this time? Her husband shook his head, eyes wide. Explains the way he carries himself. I knew there was something about him, but this? Damn. Across the street, teenagers live-streamed the scene, their phones buzzing with comments pouring in from friends. Bro, is this for real? Fake cops? HOA Wilden loudly crying face. That dude's not scared of nobody. The footage was already spreading faster than wildfire. Meanwhile, David hadn't moved from his driveway. He stood calm and centered, holding the crumpled envelope with the HOA president's name on it. His presence alone filled the air with tension, like a storm cloud no one could escape. The imposters sat slumped on the curb, humiliated, their vests askew, their bravado gone. The taller one muttered curses under his breath, but even he kept his eyes glued to the pavement, unable to look at David. Then, the whispers turned into something else, anger. One neighbor stepped out from her porch, trembling but furious. You mean to tell me the HOA paid you clowns to come here and pretend to arrest him? To terrorize a homeowner? Another man shouted from across the lawn, that's a crime. We trusted them to protect the neighborhood, not pull this nonsense. Suddenly, the mob that had once silently supported the HOA was no longer silent. David raised a hand, his voice steady. Everyone, go back inside. This isn't the kind of circus you want to get caught up in. Trust me. But the crowd wasn't listening anymore. They had lived under the HOA's iron fist for too long, petty fines, threats, harassment over the smallest details. Now, seeing two fake cops exposed for what they were lit a fuse no one could put out. Enough is enough, shouted a father from 3 houses down. We've let these people bully us for years. And now this? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the street. For the first time in years, the HOA's power was visibly cracking. David, however, stayed composed. He wasn't interested in mob justice. He knew this had to be handled by the book, or at least, by his book. His badge wasn't just metal, it was a responsibility. He crouched down in front of the imposters, speaking low so only they could hear. Your little game ends today. You're going to tell me everything, names, dates, how deep this goes. And if you lie to me, he leaned closer, his voice like ice. You won't like what happens next. The shorter man's lips trembled. It was her, all of it. Bethany Kensington. She paid us cash. Said you were a threat to the order of the neighborhood. Said you needed to be taught a lesson. David nodded, not surprised. And did she tell you who I was? Both men shook their heads violently. No! She just said you were dangerous. That you thought you were above the rules. David's smirk was cold. Above the rules? I am the rules. That line sent chills through the men, and through every neighbor close enough to hear it. Before anyone could react further, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. The imposters stiffened, panic flashing across their faces. David didn't flinch. He stood tall, his voice calm as ever. That sound? That's real law enforcement. And when they get here, this quiet little neighborhood is going to become a federal crime scene. The neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Some hurried back inside. Others stayed, unwilling to miss the spectacle. David looked at the imposters one last time and muttered, You boys should have just mowed your lawns like everyone else. And as the sirens grew louder, the neighborhood realized their HOA warlord was about to face something far bigger than she could ever control. Bethany Kensington Wright prided herself on control. Control of her neighborhood. Control of appearances. Control of people. For 5 years, she had ruled Willow Creek HOA like a queen in pearls and pastel blouses. She fined families for leaving bikes on lawns, shamed parents for unsightly toys in backyards, and even forced a widow to repaint her shutters because they weren't the approved beige. And now, the one man she couldn't bend, David Carter, threatened everything. Bethany sat at her marble kitchen island, a glass of Chardonnay sweating in her manicured hand, as her phone lit up with notifications. Dozens of texts. Missed calls. HOA board group chat exploding with messages. But what stopped her cold were the videos. She clicked one and nearly dropped her wine. There was David, calm, deliberate, terrifying, as he unmasked her hired HOA police in front of the entire block. The words that made her blood run cold played back in perfect clarity. Above the rules? I am the rules. The video had already racked up thousands of views online. Comment sections boiled with outrage and memes. HOA sending fake cops? Jail time incoming. That dude's a fed. Y'all picked the wrong one. Free movie idea, suburban HOA versus FBI loudly crying face. Bethany's hand trembled. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had expected David to be humiliated, dragged off his lawn in zip ties while neighbors applauded. A warning to anyone else who dared defy her authority. Instead, her little power play had turned her into a criminal. The sound of sirens reached even her insulated kitchen. Bethany's stomach flipped. She rushed to the blinds and peeked outside. The glow of red and blue lights painted the distant rooftops. The real police were already on scene. God, no, she whispered, her composure unraveling. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a call from her vice president, Marjorie. Bethany hesitated, then answered. Bethany! Marjorie's voice was high-pitched and frantic. What did you do? They're saying you hired fake cops. The FBI is here. Bethany snapped back, keep your voice down. Do you want the whole neighborhood to hear you screaming like a banshee? Marjorie shot back, the neighborhood already knows. Half of them are outside recording. You've destroyed us. Do you understand? Destroyed. Bethany's perfect smile cracked. Calm yourself. This is just a misunderstanding. I'll smooth it over. I always do. But even she didn't believe her words. Because this wasn't a $50 landscaping fine or a letter about mailbox paint. This was federal. Bethany stumbled toward her study, yanking open a drawer. Inside were HOA records, cash envelopes, and a burner phone she used for special arrangements. She cursed under her breath, stuffing items into a leather tote bag. She could feel her empire slipping. Her control, gone. Her power, vanished in a single morning. And at the center of it all was David Carter. Her jaw clenched as rage burned through the panic. You think you can humiliate me? You think you can take my neighborhood from me? Bethany caught her reflection in the mirror above her fireplace. Her eyes were wild, her carefully styled hair now slightly undone. For the first time in years, she looked less like a queen and more like a cornered animal. She grabbed her keys and muttered, No. I won't go down for this. Not without a fight. But Bethany didn't realize one thing. David Carter wasn't just exposing her HOA stunt. He was about to pull apart every shady deal, every off-the-books scheme, every skeleton she had buried under Willow Creek. And as she stepped into her luxury SUV, heart-pounding, Bethany Kensington Wright was no longer the hunter. She was the prey. The next morning, Willow Creek woke up to chaos. Marked patrol cars sat at the HOA clubhouse. Federal SUVs prowled the quiet cul-de-sacs. Men in suits carried laptops, folders, and evidence boxes out of Bethany's once untouchable headquarters. The sound of paper shredders, once humming inside the HOA office, had been silenced because the FBI had seized them too. And at the center of it all, standing tall on the clubhouse steps, was David Carter. No longer just the quiet, mysterious man in House 37, he now looked every bit the feared counterintelligence agent his badge declared him to be. Black suit. Tie straight. Expression unreadable. He wasn't here as a neighbor. He was here as the law. Secure the financials, David ordered, his deep voice calm but commanding. Every file, every drive, every transaction. I want digital and hard copy. Nothing leaves this property. Agents swarmed in unison, a precision Bethany could never match with her bumbling HOA enforcers. Across the street, neighbors gawked from behind hedges and blinds. Phones filmed every second. A week ago, no one would have dared cross Bethany Kensington right. Now, they watched her empire crumble like wet sand. Inside the clubhouse, David flipped open a folder that made his jaw tighten. Bank statements. Fake invoices. HOA special project accounts funneled to private contractors, shell companies with no staff, no office, no existence outside of a P.O. box. And every one of them traced back to Bethany. Classic laundering, muttered Agent Ramirez, David's longtime partner, as she scanned the numbers. She was siphoning dues into personal accounts. We're talking hundreds of thousands, maybe more. David didn't look up. And to cover her tracks, she hires 2 clowns to impersonate cops. HOA intimidation turned into federal impersonation. Amateur hour. Ramirez smirked. She picked the wrong neighbor, huh? David finally allowed himself the faintest grin. She did. At that moment, another agent entered, holding a small lockbox. Found this in her office safe. David took it, popped the latch, and frowned. Inside, a prepaid phone, a stack of unmarked envelopes stuffed with cash, and a list of names. HOA board members, contractors, even a few city officials. Beside each name, numbers, dates, and cryptic notes. David's smile vanished. She wasn't just lining her pockets. She was buying influence. Ramirez's eyes narrowed. City permits, rezoning, construction deals, she's been running Willow Creek like her personal fiefdom. David snapped the folder shut. Not anymore. Meanwhile, Bethany sat in her SUV 2 blocks away, engine idling, watching the scene unfold through binoculars. Her palms were sweaty against the leather steering wheel. She had hoped the FBI would simply make a scene, scare her, and leave. But seeing her clubhouse raided? Her files carted away? Her neighbors whispering and recording? This wasn't just an embarrassment. This was annihilation. Bethany's phone buzzed again. Another HOA board member. She let it go to voicemail. They were all panicking, looking to her for answers. But Bethany had none. She whispered to herself, "They don't know me. They don't know what I've done to stay on top. And I'll be damned if some FBI badge changes that." Her eyes burned with rage. If the FBI wanted a war, she'd give them one. Back at the clubhouse, David pocketed the lockbox evidence and gave his team a nod. "We've got enough to move forward. Issue the warrants." Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "For Bethany?" David's expression hardened, steel in his voice. "For Bethany. For her board. For every crooked name on that list. No one walks away clean." As the sun rose higher over Willow Creek, the neighborhood finally saw the truth. The HOA wasn't just a nuisance, it was a crime ring. And the man they once dismissed as just another homeowner was the one tearing it apart, brick by brick. The net was closing. And Bethany Kensington Wright's days of power were over. Bethany Kensington Wright was not the kind of woman who surrendered. Even as her perfect suburban empire crumbled in front of her eyes, even as FBI agents carted away the files that proved her corruption, she refused to accept defeat. She had built Willow Creek HOA into her private kingdom. She wasn't about to let some quiet neighbor with a badge rip it from her manicured hands. From the leather seat of her SUV, Bethany slammed her fist against the steering wheel. "No," she whispered fiercely. "Not like this. Not without a fight." Her mind raced. She still had leverage. She still had secrets. Bethany pulled out the burner phone from her tote bag and scrolled through contacts. Her finger hovered over a name, M. Caldwell. A city inspector she had paid off countless times to overlook zoning violations and greenlight HOA projects. She dialed. "Marty," she hissed the moment he picked up. "Listen carefully. The FBI is crawling all over Willow Creek. They've got my files, and if they dig deep enough, your name's all over them too. So here's what you're going to do, you're going to slow them down. Delay permits, stall paperwork, bury them in red tape. If I go down, you're going down with me. A long silence. Then Caldwell muttered, Bethany, you're toxic right now. I can't. Bethany cut him off with venom. Can't? Or won't? Because I promise you, if my career burns, I'll drag you into the flames with me. She hung up before he could reply. For the first time in her life, Bethany wasn't trying to control people, she was threatening them for survival. Meanwhile, David Carter stood in his kitchen, sipping coffee in complete calm. On the table before him were neat stacks of evidence, digital drives, and files from the clubhouse raid. To him, Bethany's countermoves weren't unexpected. In fact, he was counting on them. Ramirez entered, holding a tablet. She's making calls. Our surveillance caught her threatening Caldwell. She's spooked, but she's dangerous. David set his mug down. Good. Let her run. The more desperate she gets, the easier she is to catch. Rats always come out when the ship sinks. He leaned back, his sharp eyes unblinking. But we're not just going to catch her, we're going to dismantle her entire network. Ramirez grinned. I love it when you get that tone. That evening, as darkness fell over Willow Creek, Bethany made her move. Dressed in black slacks and a blazer, her battle uniform, she stormed into the clubhouse parking lot, where a few remaining board members huddled nervously. They looked at her like frightened children awaiting punishment. Bethany slammed her hand on the hood of a car. Listen to me. David Carter thinks he's won. He hasn't. We're not going to sit here while some outsider destroys everything we've built. Bethany, Marjorie's voice trembled. He's FBI. We can't fight the federal government. Bethany's smile was sharp, almost predatory. We don't need to fight the government. We fight him. The board exchanged uneasy glances. Bethany continued, her voice low and venomous, we find dirt on him. We dig into his past. We turn the neighbors against him. If we can paint him as dangerous, unstable, suddenly, he's the problem, not us. Marjorie whispered, that's risky. Bethany leaned close, her eyes burning. Power is risk. And if you don't have the stomach for it, step aside and let me finish what I started. The fear in their faces told her they would follow. Not out of loyalty. Out of fear. Bethany straightened, a new plan crystallizing in her mind. If David Carter wanted war, she would give him one. If the FBI wanted evidence, she would bury it in lies. And if Willow Creek thought they had seen the last of Bethany Kensington Wright, they hadn't seen anything yet. The next morning, Willow Creek woke up to whispers. Pamphlets slipped into mailboxes. Anonymous posts on the neighborhood Facebook group. Murmurs spreading like wildfire through manicured hedges and pastel-painted houses. All with one name in bold, David Carter. The flyers were designed to look official, stamped with the HOA's letterhead. They accused David of being unstable, of having a violent past, of posing as an FBI agent to intimidate the community. Do you really want a man like this living next door? One pamphlet read in ominous black print. Protect your families. Protect Willow Creek. Bethany Kensington Wright had struck back. From her kitchen, she scrolled through the HOA's private forum, watching neighbors debate. Some defended David, recalling his calm authority when he unmasked the fake police. But others, nervous, gullible, afraid, were swayed by the fearmongering. Bethany smirked, sipping her latte. Let's see how the mighty FBI man likes being on the defensive. But David Carter wasn't shaken. From his porch, he watched neighbors glance at him with suspicion as they walked their dogs or watered their lawns. He could almost hear the whispers, is it true? Could he be dangerous? Ramirez appeared at his side, holding a stack of the very pamphlets Bethany had distributed. She's playing dirty, he muttered. This could turn the neighborhood against you. David's lips curved into the faintest smile. Good. That means she's running out of moves. Ramirez frowned. You don't seem worried. Because lies collapse under truth, David replied, his voice low but sharp. And Bethany doesn't realize she's building a case for us. Every forged document, every smear tactic, it's obstruction. Intimidation. She's digging her own grave. He tapped the flyer with one finger. We just have to let her keep digging. Meanwhile, Bethany doubled down. That evening, she hosted a concerned residents' meeting at the clubhouse. She stood at the podium, pearl necklace gleaming under the fluorescent lights, speaking with practiced outrage. Friends, I never wanted this. But we must face reality. David Carter is a threat. He pretends to be an agent, but where's the proof? Where's the badge? The paperwork? We can't allow a man like this to endanger our children. Applause broke out from a cluster of loyalists in the front row. A few hesitant nods rippled through the crowd. But then, a voice cut through the noise. Bethany, you're lying, and we all know it. Every head turned. David Carter stood at the back of the room, arms folded, calm as ever. The air shifted instantly. Some residents looked relieved. Others froze in uncertainty. Bethany's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. Mr. Carter, she said sweetly, this is a private HOA meeting. You're not welcome here. David stepped forward, each footfall deliberate. His presence commanded the room. On the contrary, Mrs. Wright. As a resident of Willow Creek, and as an agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I'm very welcome here. A collective gasp swept the crowd. Bethany's face drained of color. You can't just claim that, she stammered. Where's your? David reached into his jacket and produced his credentials. The badge gleamed under the lights. Right here. The room erupted. Phones came out, recording every second. Neighbors whispered, murmured, and the tide began to turn. Bethany tried to rally. He's lying. Don't you see? This is a performance. David's voice cut through her protest like a blade. The only performance here is yours. And it ends tonight. He laid the pamphlet on the podium in front of her. Forgery. Defamation. Obstruction. Each one of these is another nail in your coffin. Keep going, Bethany. Please. You're making my job easier. The room fell silent. For the first time, Bethany Kensington Wright had no words. And for the first time, her neighbors saw her not as their queen, but as a fraud. Bethany Kensington Wright hadn't slept. Her empire was unraveling, and she could feel it in her bones. The HOA president who once strutted through Willow Creek with absolute authority was now a paranoid wreck. She drove her luxury SUV in circles around the neighborhood at 3 a.m., scanning for unmarked cars. She shredded documents until her marble kitchen was covered in paper dust. She barked orders into her burner phone, telling her contractors to disappear. But what Bethany didn't know was that every move she made was being watched. Inside a quiet van parked just outside the subdivision, David Carter and his FBI team monitored her in real time. Screens glowed with live drone footage, license plate tracking, and intercepted calls. She's spooked, Ramirez muttered, eyes on the monitor. Changing routines. Dumping files. She knows we're closing in. David leaned forward, calm as ever, his eyes locked on the feed showing Bethany pacing in her kitchen. Fear makes people sloppy. Let her sweat. He tapped the table twice, signaling the team. Tonight, we finish this. The trap was deceptively simple. Bethany believed she was meeting with a fixer, a man who could make her problems disappear for the right price. What she didn't know was that the fixer was an undercover FBI agent. The meeting was set for midnight at the empty HOA clubhouse. By then, David's team would be in position. Hidden cameras. Wiretaps. Backup units waiting 2 blocks away. All David had to do was give the word. Midnight came. Bethany arrived in her SUV, headlights cutting through the fog. She looked around nervously, clutching her tote bag. Inside, wads of cash, fake HOA ledgers, and a thumb drive filled with incriminating contracts. She stepped into the dimly lit clubhouse, heels clicking against the tile. A man in a dark suit waited at the table. "You're the cleaner?" she asked, voice trembling but trying to sound firm. The man nodded. "Depends. You have what I asked for?" Bethany slammed the bag onto the table. "Everything. Names. Numbers. Every deal I ever made. I just need you to erase it. Make it disappear. And if anyone gets in the way," her eyes hardened, "take care of them." She didn't realize the hidden mic in the man's lapel captured every word. Outside, David listened through an earpiece. Each damning sentence from Bethany was another nail in her coffin. His team was tense, waiting for the go order. But David held up a hand. Not yet. Because David Carter didn't just want Bethany arrested. He wanted her exposed. Back inside, Bethany leaned closer to the undercover agent. "Especially that Carter man. He thinks he's untouchable. Make sure he never comes back." The words hung in the air like poison. That was it. The moment David had been waiting for. He pressed his comm, "All units, go." The doors burst open. Agents in tactical gear flooded the clubhouse, weapons drawn. Bethany spun around, eyes wide with shock. "What is this?" "You can't." David Carter himself stepped forward, calm, imposing, his badge glinting under the harsh lights. "It's over, Bethany." She shook her head violently. "No! This isn't happening. You have no right." David laid the pamphlets she had forged on the table, alongside her tote bag of evidence. "I don't need rights. I have facts. And you just handed me everything." Bethany's knees buckled as two agents cuffed her hands behind her back. Her perfect suburban mask shattered, revealing the desperation underneath. You ruined me," she hissed at David as they dragged her away. David's gaze was cold, unflinching. "No. You ruined yourself." As the van doors slammed shut on Bethany Kensington Wright, the neighborhood that once feared her would wake to a new reality. The Queen of Willow Creek was gone, and her empire of lies had crumbled. But for David Carter, the most feared FBI agent, this wasn't the end. It was just another case closed. The trial of Bethany Kensington Wright wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a spectacle. For weeks, the pristine reputation of Willow Creek's queen crumbled in full public view. Reporters swarmed the courthouse, neighbors whispered in grocery store aisles, and national media seized on the story. HOA president accused of running fake police force and fraud scheme. Inside the courtroom, the woman once feared for her pastel blouses and poison pen letters sat in an orange jumpsuit, wrists chained, eyes hollow. She wasn't sipping Chardonnay now. She was fighting for her freedom. The prosecution laid it all out with ruthless clarity. The fake HOA police she had hired to intimidate homeowners. The illegal fines funneled into her personal accounts. The cash kickbacks from shady contractors. And most damning of all, her attempt to put out a hit on David Carter. Each piece of evidence stacked higher than the last. Neighbors testified. Bank records glowed on projector screens. The jury watched surveillance footage of her deal in the clubhouse, her voice crystal clear. "Especially that Carter man. He thinks he's untouchable. Make sure he never comes back." Gasps filled the courtroom. Bethany lowered her head, her carefully constructed image shattered. When the defense tried to spin her as a misunderstood community leader, David Carter himself was called to the stand. He didn't grandstand. He didn't boast. He simply told the truth, measured, steady, unshakable. "The law isn't about who has the most power in a neighborhood," he said, his eyes locking on Bethany. "It's about accountability. And no one, not even an HOA president, is above it." Those words sealed the jury's decision. After 3 weeks of testimony, the verdict came swift and unanimous. Guilty. On all counts: fraud, racketeering, impersonation of law enforcement, conspiracy, and solicitation of violence. Bethany Kensington Wright was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. The day she was taken away, neighbors lined the sidewalks of Willow Creek. Some recorded on their phones, others whispered in disbelief. The once untouchable woman was loaded into a prison van, her pearls replaced by steel shackles. Children who had once been told to keep their toys off the grass now watched as the enforcer of neighborhood perfection disappeared forever. Her empire was gone. Her house seized. Her name poisoned. But for David Carter, the case wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. Weeks later, he walked through Willow Creek again, not as a resident under siege, but as a man who had protected his community. Neighbors greeted him with handshakes, with gratitude, with relief. The HOA was dismantled. A new neighborhood association, free from corruption, rose in its place. For the first time in years, families felt free to barbecue, garden, or simply enjoy their homes without fear of fines and harassment. David Carter wasn't looking for applause. He wasn't looking for fame. He had done what he always did: silenced corruption, exposed predators, and restored order. But as he stood on his porch, the same spot where fake HOA police had once tried to take him down, he allowed himself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction. The neighborhood was safe. The queen had fallen. And David Carter, the man they thought was just another homeowner, had proven once again why he was the most feared agent in the FBI.